The last time when 6-year-old Ethan looked up from his coloring book one quiet Sunday afternoon and said matter-of-factly, "You weren't there when I died last time, but that's okay, because I understand now why you couldn't be." His parents, David and Sarah, felt the world stop spinning around them. The crayon slipped from Ethan's small fingers as he continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone much older. "I was all alone in the hospital, and I kept calling for my mommy and daddy, but you never came." Sarah's coffee mug crashed too. The floor, sending ceramic shards and hot liquid across the kitchen tiles, but she barely noticed. Her son was speaking with the calm certainty of someone recounting a memory, not spinning a childhood fantasy. The way he said, "last time," as if death was simply another experience he'd lived through, made her blood turn to ice. "Ethan." "Sweetheart," David said carefully, setting down his newspaper with trembling hands. "What do you mean, last time?" Ethan looked at his father with those impossibly wise blue eyes that had always seemed too old for his young face. "Before I was. Ethan, when I was the other boy. I got really sick, and I had to stay in the hospital for a long time, but my parents couldn't come see me because they lived too far away." He picked up his crayon again and began coloring with deliberate strokes, as if discussing a previous life. "Was the most natural thing in the world. I wasn't mad at them, though. I knew they wanted to be there. Sometimes I could feel them thinking about me, even from far away. Love travels, you know, even when people can't." Sarah sank into the chair beside Ethan, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Tell us about the other boy, honey." "What was his name?" "Timothy," Ethan said without hesitation. "Timothy James Mitchell. I was 7 years old, and I lived with my grandma and grandpa, because my real parents were in the military, and they had to be in a place called Afghanistan." The specificity of the details made David's skin crawl. This wasn't the vague storytelling of a child's imagination. Ethan spoke with the precise recollection of someone who had lived through these experiences. "What happened to Timothy?" Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Ethan's small face grew serious, his coloring forgotten. "I got leukemia. That's a sickness in your blood. It makes you very tired and weak. Grandma and Grandpa took me to lots of doctors, and I had to take medicine that made me feel even sicker for a while." He looked up at his parents with eyes that held too much understanding of suffering. "The doctors tried really hard to make me better, but the sickness was stronger. I was in the hospital for my 7th birthday, and Grandma brought me a cake with dinosaur candles, but I was too tired to blow them out." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes as she listened to her 6-year-old son describe a childhood cut short by illness. Where were Timothy's parents? They were soldiers fighting in the war. They wanted to come home when they found out I was sick, but their captain said they couldn't leave because their mission was too important. Ethan's voice carried no bitterness, only the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had learned too early that life isn't always fair. "They would call me on the computer sometimes, and Mommy would cry when she saw how skinny I was getting." David exchanged a meaningful look with Sarah. The details Ethan was sharing, the military deployment, the video calls, the grandparents, as caregivers, painted a picture that was both heartbreakingly specific and entirely plausible. How did Timothy die?" David asked gently. Ethan set down his crayon and climbed into Sarah's lap, seeking comfort for a memory that belonged to another lifetime. "It was nighttime, and I was having trouble breathing. The nurses were running around, and there were lots of machines beeping really loud. Grandpa was holding my hand, and Grandma was crying." His small voice grew softer, more distant. "I could see my parents on the computer screen. They were trying to talk to me from the army place, but the connection kept cutting out. Daddy was in his uniform, and Mommy was crying so hard she could barely speak." Sarah held Ethan tighter, her own tears falling freely now. What happened next, sweetheart? I told Grandpa to tell my parents that I loved them and that I wasn't scared. And everything got very quiet and peaceful, and I wasn't sick anymore. Ethan looked up at Sarah with a smile that seemed to carry light from another world. I went to a beautiful place where there was no pain, and I could run and play again. He paused, his young brow furrowed in concentration. But I could still see my family sometimes. I could see how sad my parents were when they finally came home and found out I was gone. They blamed themselves for not being there, for choosing the army over me. David felt his throat tighten. But they didn't choose the army over you, did they? They were serving their country. I know that now, Ethan said wisely. But they didn't know it then. They carried so much guilt, thinking they were bad parents for not being there when I needed them most. That's part of why I came back too. Help them understand that love doesn't require physical presence to be real. Sarah stared at her son, struggling to process what she was hearing. Ethan, are you saying you chose to be reborn? Ethan nodded seriously. Not exactly chose, but agreed to it. The light people told me that my parents from before needed to learn that they were good parents, even though circumstances kept them away. And they said I could help teach that lesson by coming back as someone else's child. He looked between David and Sarah with infinite love. They said I would have new parents who would love me just as much, and that through loving you and being loved by you, I would understand all the different ways that families can be formed and maintained. Over the following days, David and Sarah found themselves researching everything they could about Timothy James Mitchell. What they discovered made their hands shake as they read through military casualty reports and obituaries from 7 years earlier. Timothy Mitchell had indeed died of leukemia at age 7, while his parents, Staff Sergeant Michael Mitchell and Sergeant First Class Jennifer Mitchell, were deployed in Afghanistan. He had been cared for by his paternal grandparents during his illness. The obituary mentioned that his parents had been granted emergency leave, but arrived home only hours after Timothy's death. The details matched Ethan's account with unsettling accuracy, down to the video calls, a dinosaur birthday cake, and the grandparents' presence during his final moments. But it was the follow-up article they found that truly shook them. Michael and Jennifer Mitchell had both left the military after Timothy's death, struggling with severe guilt and depression. Their marriage had nearly ended under the weight of their shared trauma, and both had required extensive counseling to cope with the belief that they had failed their son when he needed them most. We need to find them, Sarah said, staring at the computer screen. If Ethan is right, if he really came back to help them heal, then they need to know. David was hesitant. Sarah, how do we approach 2 grieving parents and tell them that our 6-year-old son claims to be the reincarnation of their dead child? They'll think we're insane. But Ethan, who had been listening from the doorway, walked into the room with quiet determination. They'll believe it because they need to believe it. Their hearts are ready to hear that Timothy is okay, that he forgives them, that he never blamed them for not being there. He climbed onto David's lap, his small hands framing his father's face. Daddy, some messages are too important to worry about whether people will think you're crazy. Timothy's parents have been carrying pain for 7 years. If I can help them let go of that pain, isn't it worth trying? The meeting was arranged through a military chaplain who had worked with the Mitchell family during their darkest period. Michael and Jennifer Mitchell, now in their early 40s and still bearing the weight of their loss, agreed to meet with David, Sarah, and Ethan at a neutral location, a quiet park where children played and families gathered. When Ethan saw the Mitchells approaching across the grass, he broke away from his parents and ran directly to them with the confidence of a child greeting beloved relatives. Both Michael and Jennifer stopped in their tracks, staring at this small boy who looked nothing like their Timothy, but somehow felt achingly familiar. You came, Ethan said simply, looking up at them with eyes that held recognition and forgiveness in equal measure. I knew you would. You always come when I really need you. Jennifer sank to her knees, her face level with Ethan's. Who are you? She whispered. I'm Timothy, Ethan said gently. I'm different now, and I have a new family, but I'm still your son, and I came back to tell you something very important. Michael's composure cracked. Timothy died 7 years ago. We weren't there. We failed him. Ethan stepped forward and took Michael's large hand in his small one. You didn't fail me, Daddy. You were exactly where you needed to be, doing exactly what you needed to do. I was proud of you for serving our country, for protecting other people's children even when it meant being away from me. He turned to Jennifer, his young face radiating love and understanding. And Mommy, you didn't abandon me. Every video call, every time you cried because you couldn't be there, every prayer you said for me, I felt all of it. Your love was with me every single day. Jennifer broke down completely, pulling Ethan into a fierce embrace. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry we weren't there when you died. But you were there, Ethan said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Love doesn't need a physical body to be present. Your love surrounded me, protected me, comforted me. I was never alone because I carried your hearts with me. The conversation continued for hours, with Ethan sharing memories that only Timothy could have known, offering forgiveness that his parents had been unable to give themselves, and providing the closure that had eluded them for 7 years. I need you to stop punishing yourselves, Ethan said as the afternoon sun began to set. I need you to remember that you were good parents who made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. And I need you to know that I'm happy now, in this life and in the space between lives. He looked at his 2 sets of parents, the ones who had given him life as Timothy and the ones who are raising him as Ethan. Love multiplies. It doesn't divide. I can love all of you completely, and you can love me in whatever form I take. As the months passed, both families stayed in touch. Michael and Jennifer Mitchell began the long process of healing, finally, able to release the guilt that had poisoned their lives for nearly a decade. They started a foundation in Timothy's memory, helping military families cope with medical crises while deployed. Ethan gradually lost the intense connection to Timothy's memories, but he retained the wisdom and compassion that had allowed him to serve as a bridge between worlds. He grew into a remarkable child with an unusual ability to comfort others and an intuitive understanding of the different forms that love can take. Do you miss being Timothy? Sarah asked him one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Ethan considered the question seriously. I miss the feeling of being their son in that special way, but I love being your son too. And I understand now that love doesn't have to be exclusive to be complete. He leaned against Sarah's shoulder. Besides, Timothy's job is finished. He delivered the message he came back to deliver. Now Ethan gets to live his own life and create his own story. The last time they saw Michael and Jennifer Mitchell was at a military appreciation event where the foundation they'd started was being honored. Ethan ran up to them with the enthusiasm of any child greeting family friends, but when Jennifer hugged him, she whispered in his ear, "Thank you for coming back to us, even if it was just for a little while." Ethan smiled up at her with eyes that briefly held the depth of someone much older. Love never really leaves Mrs. Jennifer. It just finds new ways to show itself. As they drove home that night, David reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. His son had carried the memories of another child's love and loss, had served as a messenger between the living and the grieving, had brought healing to a family torn apart by guilt and sorrow. It defied every rational explanation, challenged every assumption about the nature of life and death, and the continuity of consciousness. But it had also revealed profound truths about the enduring power of love, the unbreakable bonds between parents and children, and the mysterious ways that the universe sometimes allows healing to occur across the boundaries of individual lifetimes. Ethan fell asleep in the back seat, his dreams filled not with memories of hospital rooms and final goodbyes, but with hopes for the future and the simple joy of being a child surrounded by love. And somewhere in the space between what we can prove and what we choose to believe, Timothy Mitchell finally found the peace he'd been seeking, knowing that his parents understood they had never failed him. That love transcends physical presence, and that the most important message of all had been delivered. Good parents are defined not by their ability to prevent every tragedy, but by the depth of their love and the strength of their commitment, even when circumstances make that love difficult to express. If Ethan's story touches your heart the way it does mine, please subscribe to our channel. We explore the mysteries of consciousness, the unexplained connections between life and death, and the remarkable ways that love finds expression even in the most impossible circumstances. Your subscription helps us continue sharing these incredible tales that remind us that the bonds between parents and children are stronger than death itself, and that sometimes the most healing words come from the most unexpected messengers.